Okay, there's a question in the chat. How much prep do I do for a show? So usually what happens is I just read the things I want to read without respect to the show. And then I wait for like a trigger to go off in my mind saying, "Oh, I want to talk about that." Because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do a show. It takes about 10 times more energy to do this show than to have this conversation with a friend. So I wait until some switch in my mind flips and I become energized at the prospect of doing a show. So this morning, for example, I read the LA Times. I woke up this morning at 7:13 a.m. with the change to daylight savings. Normally I wake up about 5:30, but this morning I woke up at 7:13 and I didn't have anything. Yesterday, there was nothing I was thinking about talking about on the show. I woke up this morning, there was nothing I wanted to talk about on the show. Occasionally in the middle of the night, I'll get an idea or something I want to talk about on the show. Then I read the LA Times. There wasn't anything I really wanted to talk about. I read the New York Times this morning over breakfast. There was nothing I wanted to talk about. Prior to breakfast, I did my meditation and listened to a spiritual talk for about 15 minutes. Then I think I listened to another YouTube clip while I was doing some exercises. Nothing was triggering. Nothing was firing. I read the Washington Post this morning, and I saw the visual essay on Fukushima, and I thought, maybe I'll talk about that one day. Then I read Steve Saylor's blog, and I liked the story he had right at the top about how the Me Too movement led to QAnon. So I thought, I'd like to talk about that one day, but I didn't have enough to fire me up to do a show this morning. So I had not yet any desire to do a show today. I was just going to take the day off and just read. And then I thought, let me cruise over to outsidethebeltway.com. And then I saw about 4 stories on Outside the Beltway that I wanted to talk about. So by now I've got enough stuff. I thought, I've got enough for a show. So I usually just read the things I want to read. I would read the LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Steve Saylor's blog on a daily basis, even if I wasn't doing a show. So I just read all the things I want to read. I'm reading Kevin Starr's book, Coast of Dreams, A History of California from 1990 to 2003. I'm reading another book, The Professor of Unbelief, David Friedrich Strauss, a Protestant historian, theologian who wrote Life of Jesus, A Critical Examination in 1835, one of the 2 most controversial books of the 19th century, along with Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. So I would read these books even if I wasn't doing a show. So I don't make much money from doing the show. So I only talk about the topics that are of interest to me. I don't choose topics to get the maximum audience. And I only do a show when I get enough energy that's released by things that I'm reading, so that I would feel less happy if I couldn't go on here and talk about these things than if I just kept them to myself. So I read the things I want to read, and then it's like a tension builds up. So I've got nothing, then I've got a mild inclination to do a show, then it moves into a moderate inclination to do a show, and then I reach a threshold. It's like, I've got enough to do a show. Do I want to do it or not? And then I think, do I really want to let this tension just build up and carry over to another day? Let me just get rid of it by tackling all these stories right now. And then occasionally I'll get a thought, an idea, or I'll read something, and I'll have a perspective on something I've read, and the switch will just flip in my head. It's like, I've got to go live now. I've got to talk about this. So unless I reach that threshold of it would cause me more discomfort to not do a show right now, because there are all these things that I want to discuss. Until I reach that point, I don't do a show. So I'm not like Kevin Michael Grace or JF Garapi. They're more professional. They schedule their shows at regular times. I wait until something goes off in my head so that I really want to do a show. And I would have no problems going 3 days without doing a show if nothing is compelling me to do a show. So that's how it works. So it's hard to judge how much prep time I do for a show. I just read the things I want to read, watch the things I want to watch, And then in the process of doing what I want to do, if I encounter something that would give me pleasure to talk about on the show, I just throw it down in a Gmail folder of possible show topics, and then it just builds up. So I think probably on my own, I spend an hour a day reading the LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Steve Saylor's blog. Then I probably spend up to another hour a day reading things from Twitter, links from Twitter, reading ESPN, The Athletic, just random things. Then I probably spend about 3 hours a day on average reading books. And so, in a sense, that's prep time. I probably spend probably up to an hour a day on podcasts or YouTube videos. So I guess that's all, in a sense, prep time. But on the other hand, I would be doing virtually all of these things even if I wasn't doing a show. So in a sense, the prep time I put in is probably 2 to 1. So for every 3 hours of show, there's 6 hours of prep time. But in another sense, this is just time I would spend reading anyway.